What is up, everybody? Welcome into the first week of August. Welcome into our Wednesday live. Let's get that screen share going here, and we'll get started. Perfect. We're rolling. Alrighty. So today, what we're going to be talking about are 7 very common misconceptions or myths surrounding fitness and health that we have kind of been taught or sold. Honestly, a lot of them are kind of it's a sales pitch. We're just going to kind of hop right into them. There's a lot more than 7 of these, but these are kind of the 7 like really big ones that I seem to have repeated conversations with about with people, and these are ones that I think are kind of pretty widely held and widely spread myths. So we're just gonna kind of hop right into it. The first one here is that deadlifting is dangerous or bad for you. Okay, so this is anybody who's been to the gym, anybody who's ever talked to some trainers will kind of talk about this. Personal trainers, I'm sure you'll find, physical therapists, any other kind of lifting athlete will tell you that, deadlifts are risky, they're bad for you, the benefits don't outweigh the risks, which is just kind of not really true, especially when you do it correctly. Now, obviously there is kind of there's a risk of injury, as with any kind of lift or activity. Honestly, any kind of activity that we do, you can get hurt walking down the street, right? So kind of the big argument that always gets brought into this is, well, it puts a lot of strain on your low back, which to some degree is true, but here's where kind of some of that nuance comes into it. If you do this properly, it's actually a very good lift, both for strengthening your posterior chain, your hamstrings, your glutes, and honestly, your core. If you do it properly, it's a really, really good compound lift. So it crosses a whole bunch of joints. It's a very functional movement. Something that we probably don't think about very much is how we lift, the exercises that we do, the workouts that we do, how they translate into real life. And there's something to be said for the functionality of a lift is arguably one of its most important attributes. A deadlift, for example, if you have to bend over to pick up a basket of laundry off the floor, or pick up a child, or you drop something and you have to bend over to pick it up, to some degree, that's the same as a deadlift, depending on how heavy it is, depending on how large it is, all those kinds of things. And so doing that properly, being trained how to do that properly is A, very important, and B, translates very well into actually using this as an exercise in a workout. So kind of the progression that we tend to see here, what people will talk about is maintaining a flat back. Okay, so these three postures right here, these 3 models that we see, the big thing is, hey, we always have to keep a neutral spine. We always have to keep a flat back. Now, there's something to be said about not having a huge rounded back when you deadlift, but this guy right here is probably a little more of the reality of the situation. What people are concerned about when we deadlift, and they say it puts a lot of strain on your low back, what we're concerned about is the pressure that's being put on your discs in particular. Your discs, and then the actual joints themselves versus the musculature. The musculature is what's supposed to bear most of that load. And when we have a stiff spine, that is the case. Most of that work gets transitioned into the muscles. Now, there's a couple of things that kind of go into having that stiff spine. And while one of them is having a neutral spine, so kind of this, like they talk about a flat back, that's what we would call a neutral spinal position. While that is a piece of it, it's not the whole thing. This range that we're seeing here, where there's kind of there's almost like an acceptable range of outcome, right? That's kind of the next step here, is realizing that, like, hey, to some degree, there's going to be, you can't keep your spine perfectly still, and that's not functional, and that's not how we move through life. That's not how we move through the world. That's not how gravity acts on us. That's just not how it's going to be. And so then we kind of make this step into, okay, well, there's actually been some research that's come out more recently that says that, hey, first of all, a little bit of that rounding of the spine is kind of inevitable. Like, you can't you can't say never, but you can't really hardly ever keep a completely neutral spine. And when we have a little bit of that flexion in there, it's actually can help us be more stable, can actually help that spine be stiffer and more stable. So again, that force that is applied when we're deadlifting gets transferred into the muscles instead of the joints and the discs. which again is what we're trying to protect. So kind of like this says down below, some evidence shows that our spine can even be stronger in a flex position, and that in most exercises, a degree of spinal flexion is unavoidable, which may actually throw off the idea of, honestly, even kind of this acceptable range that it kind of talks about here. So long story short, all that to say, deadlifting, when done properly and when done with proper bracing and those kinds of things, is not dangerous and is actually a very good exercise, and one that should be utilized throughout your workouts, throughout your daily life. And so it's with the caveat in there is that it's very important that it's done correctly. So like I said, it's not that there's no risk to this, and it's not that, we can just run around willy-nilly trying to pick stuff up however we want, but there's a quote unquote proper way to do it. And learning that is also kind of one of the more important aspects of this. But when done correctly, deadlifting is very functional. It's very good for you. It's a good way to build strength. It's a good nervous system stimulant because it requires a lot of different joints. It requires a lot of body spatial awareness. And a lot of times it's really heavy. So a lot of times oftentimes a person's deadlift is their heaviest lift, just in terms of straight poundage. So it's a big like nervous system stimulus, which is also good for you every once in a while. So that's kind of what we'll go at the deadlifts with. Like I said, kind of the myth is that it's dangerous and it's bad for you. It's not dangerous if you do it correctly, and it's certainly not bad for you. So kind of in that same vein, the next one that we get preached at is that squatting below parallel is bad for you, specifically bad for your knees. Now, again, when you squat improperly, even if you don't squat below parallel, if you squat improperly, you're going to have some extra strain on joints that don't want it and shouldn't be carrying it, right? So again, along with this is the caveat that we need to learn how to do this properly, right? But when done properly, squatting below 90, squatting below parallel is actually very functional and good for you. So when we stop, so kind of this little guy, which squat is best? We kind of have like a quarter squat is A, B is like an actual parallel squat, and then C is obviously you get your hips below your knees a little bit. And so what they actually, all the latest research, all those kinds of things have found is that squatting below parallel is actually very, very good for people who have the mobility to do it. There's a lot of benefits to it. It's very like I said, functionality is a very important part of an exercise, and being able to get up off the ground from below a parallel position is very advantageous, particularly for tall people. If you're sitting in low chairs all the time, or like, for example, preschool or kindergarten teachers or daycare providers, all those types of jobs where you're dealing with kids all the time and you're down on their level, you drop down, whether it's because the chairs are low or because you kind of squat down to talk to them, right? Being in that position, being strong and having good mobility through that position is very important. And as we age, getting up and down, like out of a chair, off of the toilet, like getting off the side of your bed, all those things, you have to be able to do it. It's very, very functional. Squatting is what is almost not even arguably the most functional movement there is. Because again, we're getting up and down out of chairs. We got to get up and down off the ground, bending down, kind of picking things up. There's a way that we can kind of squat to pick things up as well, as opposed to the deadlift. So being able to squat below parallel is very, very important. Again, there's a couple more things that go into it, but working towards those things and being able to do that is a very worthy goal. Now, there are definitely going to be anatomical differences here between people. Okay. Some people feel like whenever they squat, particularly if they're doing so with a barbell, they're like, oh, why do I have to bend? Why do I feel like I have to bend so much at my hips? Okay. That's a very valid question and a very valid anatomical kind of observance. What can happen is for people who have longer femurs, so if your thigh is a lot longer than your shin, you're going to have to bend forward at the waist just by the nature of how gravity works on us here. When this barbell is pushing us down, if this anchor is way back here compared to that lever, of course, you're going to have to lean farther forward so that this downward force gets pushed closer to here so that you don't fall over backwards. Okay. So that to say that everyone's squat is going to look a little bit different, and anatomy definitely plays a part. If you have, some people have a lot deeper hip sockets than others. So if you think about like your hip joint is like a ball and socket, right? So it sits right here. If people have a shallow hip joint, you're going to have a lot more mobility there. You're going to have a lot more flexibility because that ball has a lot more freedom to move. If you have a deeper hip socket where that head is sunken a little deeper into your acetabulum, which is kind of your pelvic part of your hip joint, then you're going to have a lot less mobility there. And so you're probably not going to be able to do a squat that's super, super deep without having your feet real wide, which is fine again. But something that is helpful to discover is, which type of squat best suits my anatomy. But kind of the other piece of that is ankle mobility. Ankle mobility is also a super duper important part of A, squatting, and B, just moving through life. Your ankle is supposed to be a very mobile joint. So your ankle, there's kind of a pattern that goes up the chain, as they say. Your ankle is a very mobile joint. Okay, your knee joint is supposed to be very stable. Your knee joint only really moves in one plane. Okay, it flexes and extends, right? It's what they call a hinge joint. So you have your ankle that's a bunch of little joints that moves a lot. Your ankle is similar to your wrist, where you can do this kind of stuff with it, right? And your body kind of mirrors this upper extremity and lower extremity. Your knee is very stable, just like your elbow. Okay, your elbow actually has a little bit more going on, but your knee is a very, very stable hinge joint, moves in one direction. Then your hip, similar to your shoulder, is a ball and socket joint. It's supposed to be very mobile. We can move it in all kinds of different ways, and we have to be able to do that in order to move through life. So we've got a mobility joint, your ankle, followed by a stability joint, your knee, followed by a mobile joint, your femoroacetabular, your hip joint, followed by a stability joint, which is kind of your lumbar spine, and how it connects to the back of your pelvis is supposed to be very stable. So we've got this mobile, stable, back and forth. So in order to be able to squat like this, in order to be able to deadlift, in order to be able to move through life, we have to be able to get the proper mobility from the joints that need it. And if we don't have proper mobility, that's where we start ending up with knee pain. We end up with hip pain. And if you don't have very mobile hips, that can lead to low back pain. That can also lead to knee pain. So each one of these joints kind of relies upon the one above and below it. And so kind of tying that back into squatting, in order to squat low, we have to have good ankle mobility. We have to have at least like adequate hip mobility, and we have to have pretty good ankle mobility, which is something that can be worked on. Very rarely is anatomy an issue in ankle mobility. It can be previous injury can cause reduced ankle mobility. If you've had like a really big fracture and now you have a plate and screws in your foot, obviously that's a different story. But for the average person who hasn't had any major injuries there, that is something that can vary greatly, and can also be greatly influenced by stretching, movement, mobility, strengthening, all those kinds of things. So all that to say, being able to get down close to the ground and then stand back up is a very, very functional movement. Again, getting up and down out of a chair, getting up and down off of the toilet, off of the couch, off of your bed, anything like that, or even just bending down to pick stuff up. That is a very, very functional movement. And it's very important that we are able to move through that range of motion, particularly as we age, with strength. Because one of the biggest fears, like data, they poll people all the time, and like all the data that comes out, one of the biggest fears for people over the age of 65 is a fall. Because a lot of times when you fall, either it's accompanied by or due to a fracture of some kind. People talk about you fall and break your hip, right? That tends to be a really, really rough injury for people. So being strong and mobile through, getting up and down off the ground, being able to pick stuff up off the floor, those are very important things that you have to be able to do as you age in order to avoid those things, feel stable, feel comfortable, and maintain independence and longevity. So again, kind of I got all that to say, squatting below parallel is very good for you and something that you should do. Okay. And there are modifications that can be made to make that easier, to take stress off of different joints. There are things that you can do to help with that ankle mobility that I was talking about. There are ways that you can work around even like knee and hip pain, all those kinds of things. So there's an option for everybody. Sometimes it just requires a little bit of modification, which is totally fine. But again, being able to do that is a very, very good thing, particularly as we age. So that's number 2. Number 3, as you can see here, lifting weights will make me bulky. This a lot of times has been marketed and maybe not even marketed, but just that's the sentiment that has kind of been pushed and directed towards ladies. And so that tends to discourage them from doing any kind of heavy lifting, right? Or what we perceive as heavy lifting in the gym, doing heavy lifting workouts. That's actually very not true, and actually will prevent, again, particularly ladies, from reaching their full potential in terms of both mobility and strength. So kind of another way to frame this is, there was a thing that came across my feed on some, I don't remember if it was Instagram or what it was, some social media app, that someone had pointed out, I've seen mothers hold a 30 to 40 pound child in one arm and a 30 pound and 30 pounds worth of groceries in the other arm. And they're kicking the door shut and they're walking, they're doing all of that very functionally and very well. And then you get them into a gym and they're scared to touch a weight that's more than 15 pounds. Because either it has been told to them that like, ooh, watch out, that's a heavy dumbbell. Or because, hey, ooh, don't want to lift heavy because you're going to get bulky and you're going to look like a man. You're going to look manly. Neither of those things are true. So obviously, carrying a 40 pound child and a 30 pounds worth of groceries in either arm, that's a very impressive feat of strength while you're balancing and trying not, the kid's probably squirming and they're holding on to the kid. That's a very impressive feat of strength. Now, for some reason, the way that it's been marketed when we get in the gym, that's kind of like, oh, yep, don't want to touch that. It looks heavy. It looks scary. Or I don't want to get bulky. I don't want to lift really heavy. Again, very detrimental to again, I'll say this again, particularly ladies, reaching their full potential in terms of strength and functionality. So kind of the other aspect of that where, oh, I don't want to touch that looks heavy. The other kind of mindset of that is I don't want to look bulky. I don't want to look jacked. It's really, really hard to get jacked. If it were easy, if all it took were going to the gym 3 days a week and and having a protein shake afterwards for people to get bulky and jacked, every guy between the age of 15 and 40 would be absolutely would look like a bodybuilder, right? And that's obviously not the case. Getting that physique that people think about when they talk about like, oh, I don't want to look bulky, I don't want to look big. Getting big like that, getting large in terms of muscular growth is very hard to do. It's hard because it requires consistency. It requires, lifting heavy, 3, 4, 5, 6 days a week. And it requires being in a massive calorie surplus, a massive calorie and a massive protein surplus. So, and we'll kind of reach back around and talk about this here as we kind of get down towards a couple of the other things that I'm going to talk about here in a bit. But getting big and bulky is very hard, and you have to be intentional, and that has to be your goal. Otherwise, it ain't going to happen. So again, it's been marketed as like, oh, scary, don't want to touch that. That's heavy. And I don't want to get bulky, where in reality, women are capable of awesome feats of strength, and they do it all the time throughout the day. But it's never framed as, wow, you just lifted that really heavy thing. Wow, you just carried your, even if you carried your 20-pound toddler, or, if you're going, let's say you're going to the fair and you carry your 20-pound toddler for a half hour, that's a long time. That's a long time to be carrying around 20 pounds. So that means that when you're in the gym doing curls and you're like, oh, don't want to touch that big weight because I don't know if I can do that, and that's kind of scary, you've done it. It just didn't look like a dumbbell. It looked like your kid. So again, unfortunately, it's been pushed that way. And so it's very understandable why people hold that mindset. But one conversation I love having with people is kind of busting that myth of, hey, like, that's not going to make you bulky. It's very, very good for you. And it's very, very functional, is lifting heavy, heavy weights. So that's kind of where we're at. That's number 3. Number 4, I have to be exhausted and sore after a workout, or I didn't do anything. I didn't do enough. Not true. So kind of what that mindset can lead to is actually overtraining and spending certainly more time in the gym than you need to in order for an effective workout. Your body's very good at adapting to things. So once you start putting it under consistent stress, it's going to figure out how to deal with that stress. So they talk about, there's a concept called progressive overload, where that's where you keep putting more weight on. because your body keeps getting stronger, right? So you can continue along you can listen to your body and go, hey, this felt pretty light today. I'm going to go a little bit heavier. This felt really heavy today because I'm maybe not feeling 100%. I'm going to go a little bit lighter. And then after your workout, you either don't have like that pump, as they say, or you're like, oh, you wake up the next day and you're like, oh, I don't feel sore. That means I didn't work hard enough. Not true. That just means that as you start to work out, your body figures out how to deal with lactic acid buildup, which is kind of that initial burn particularly when you're lifting weights. Your body figures out how to deal with that. And then DOMS, delayed onset muscle syndrome, is kind of that like next day and 2 days later where you get sore. Your body learns how to deal with all of those, what they call metabolites, which are the byproducts of working out. Your body figures out how to deal with those after it's been doing it for a little while. And so it gets really good at kicking them out. So then you wake up, your body's like, hey, I'm prepared to heal, especially when you fuel right, when you eat right, when you eat enough calories, enough protein, you get your kind of macros dialed in. Your body goes, oh yeah, I know how to deal with this. We've got all the supplies we need to fix that, to repair all those muscle tissues. And we also have what we need. We're hydrated and all those things to kick all that junk out. So now we're not going to be sore afterwards. So any kind of nervous system stimulation, lifting weights, all those kinds of things doesn't have to be accompanied by 2 days of extreme soreness afterwards in order to be effective. You can get very, very, very effective workouts, again, particularly after you've been doing it for a little bit, without being massively sore afterwards. Your body's good at adapting to things. It figures it out, particularly when you fuel it right. Again, all those things. That's what's going to really help you continue to be consistent. Because a lot of times what happens is people go in, they're excited. They're like, hey, I'm back. When they first go back to the gym, they're like, hey, I'm excited. I'm going to do all the stuff. I'm going to lift as heavy as I can. And we're going to go nuts. And then they wake up the next morning, they can't move. And then they wake up the next day, it's even worse. And so then they're like, oh, I can't possibly go back to the gym. So kind of the best way to do that, you ease into it. You might be a little bit sore. Then once you've been going for a couple of weeks, then your body's like, okay, yep, we're kind of in the groove now. I've figured out how to deal with all these things. You're not going to get super crazy sore. And that's perfectly fine. Actually, it's good because it's conducive to more working out. So that's good. More exercise, more activity. Next, number 5, ab workouts are the best way to get a toned or a six-pack or a strong core. Okay. That's also false. Now, I'm not going to talk anybody out of doing sit-ups or V-ups or Russian twists or whatever. But if you actually want a strong functional core, that shouldn't be the bulk of your ab work, of your core work. Okay. Those kinds of, like I said, sit-ups, V-ups, Russian twists with the ball. That's not super functional because we don't ever find ourselves in that position in real life. So again, the functionality is how well does this exercise translate into real life? And none of those things really translate into real life very well. So what we can replace those with are things like odd object, like sandbag type carries, suitcase carries, which is kind of where it sounds like you're just carrying a suitcase where you take a dumbbell or a kettlebell and you can do 2, you can do 1. They have different, uneven suitcase carries have different benefits than, just really heavy suitcase carries. Both of them are very good for you, but they work different muscles. They have different things. Honestly, deadlifting, squatting, any kind of compound movement should be a core workout. And we'll talk about that here. We'll kind of talk about some of the mechanics of that. So we'll start here. So this right here is kind of a side view of your abdomen, right? So your transverse abdominis, this guy right here, right? All of its fibers run like this. So this is the way that they're facing. This sits underneath your rectus abdominis, which runs this direction. Your rectus abdominis is what everybody thinks of when you think of your abs, because that's your six-pack muscle, okay, is your rectus abdominis. You can't see it in this picture, but that's okay. Then the other aspects of your core, you have a lot of different muscles that control and run through your abdomen. So your pelvic floor are a couple of muscles down here that are actually quite very important to proper bracing, proper core strength, low back strength, and abs, honestly, kind of both ways there. So your multifidi are these little guys that run in your low back. Okay. They kind of run diagonal. There's, stuff on either side. Okay. And then your diaphragm is kind of the top of what you'd consider your core. It attaches to your bottom ribs. Okay. And so these are all important aspects of your core. Now, strengthening these looks and strengthening them in a functional way looks different than doing sit-ups, because most of the time when we need to brace our core, we're standing up, right? Very rarely when we're laying down do we ever is it ever necessary for us to brace ourselves. So when do we brace ourselves? Lifting something heavy is the big one, right? There's a type of bracing that you do before you get like punched in the stomach, but I don't think most of us have to deal with that on a daily basis. But picking something up that's heavy, picking up a kid, basket of laundry, bags of groceries, you're moving something around in your garage, like whatever it is, playing a sport, you have to be able to brace. If you're playing football, you have to brace in order to hit. If you're playing basketball, you have to brace in order to move through, going through traffic, moving through the lane, bumping into people. When you're off balance, you have to be able to brace in order to stay on your feet. So again, deadlifting, squatting, suitcase carries are all phenomenal core bracing exercises that should be more widely used. And the reason for that is, so you'll notice there's a can right here, soda looking can. This is oftentimes used as an analogy for your abdomen. Okay. So your abdomen is everything from below your diaphragm, which attaches to your lower ribs, to your pelvic floor, which, like you can see here, attaches to your tailbone, and then kind of the lower bones of your pelvis. And so all of this can be represented by this can right here. Okay. So your diaphragm is the top. Diaphragm's the top. Also kind of like, you can think of it as a bottle as well. Like, so your diaphragm would be like the cap. So here, your diaphragm is the little tab that is either open or closed. So once you open it, obviously you break the seal, and then that's open. Your rectus abdominis, your transverse abdominis, your serratus anterior, which kind of runs like this. Your obliques, which also kind of run diagonally. Your multifidi are all the sides. Okay. So everything from here down to there. Okay. It encapsulates the entirety of your abdomen, of your midsection. And that's what makes up the body of the can. Your pelvic floor is the bottom. Okay. If you were to take this can and open it and empty it and then step on it, it would, or if you were to open it, empty it, and then apply pressure down. So like if you were to step on it, like stomp on it, or if you were to grab it in your hand and squeeze it. Okay. So you squeeze it this way. This is where all the force goes. That can is going to crumple, right? That can is going to just done. So what bracing looks like and how this fits into that analogy is, if you took an unopened can, and even if there was nothing in it, so this is why I kind of like the using like a bottle as a like a bottle that you can see through. If you take a plastic water bottle, you screw the cap on real tight. So if you loosen up the cap and squeeze, same thing, it goes right. You can squeeze it. It fits in your hand just like this. If you screw the lid back on really tight and squeeze it, it's going to deform a little bit, but you're not going to be able to crunch it. You're not going to be able to crush it. Same thing, like if you took an unopened soda can, you can stand on an unopened soda can. It won't pop. It's not going anywhere. So your diaphragm is that bottle cap, is that tab that hasn't been opened. If you do not use your diaphragm well, your core is going to crumple, which is how we end up with low back pain and hip pain, because that's kind of the front of your hip there. So if that diaphragm is well trained and well used, it drops. So as we take a nice deep breath in, it actually drops down to here and increases the pressure within our abdomen. So now you have, so let's use the can again. So let's say this is closed. This tab has not been popped open. It's still closed. If I try to squeeze it, I'm putting pressure in these directions, right? Because that air can't escape, because there's pressure in there, it's going to push back out against me, and I am not going to be able to crush it. Same thing goes with your abdomen. Whenever we lift something heavy, whether you're putting a barbell on your back or if you're picking something up off the floor, the gravity and the rest of you, and if you have a weight, if you have a barbell on your shoulders up here, that weight is pushing down. If you don't use your diaphragm, you're going to crumple. If you use your diaphragm properly, where it drops here, you create a lot more pressure inside your abdomen. So your abdomen is able to push outward against all forces. So now you have the barbell that's coming down here. You have gravity that as you kind of move forward is going to try to pull you, it's going to shove you that way. You're pushing back this way. Your balance, it's going to want to try to tip you backwards. It's pushing you this way. Your abdomen's pushing out that way. Okay. So you are going to meet the needs and you're going to push back against all of those forces if you properly use your diaphragm, which again is why suitcase carries and deadlifts and squats are really good exercises if you know how to properly brace. There's a type of breathing called diaphragmatic breathing that we tend to not use as much as we should because we all breathe through our shoulders because we're all trying to look a certain way, right? So you take it. So if I were to say, take a deep breath in, right, that's what it's going to look like. Okay. Your shoulders go up and down. The way that we should breathe is through our midsection here. It takes a little bit of practice and sometimes even a little bit of like a physical cue to be able to do well. So that's something that, again, I have this conversation with a lot of people. This is kind of a better, image of what I was explaining before about this intra-abdominal pressure. This here is your diaphragm that kind of attaches to the bottom of your ribs, right? You got pressure coming in, pressure coming in, pressure coming in, pressure coming in. You got these black arrows that are going out, 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 because that diaphragm is not allowing your lower body or your abdomen to collapse. And so it's pushing against you, you push against it, and you're good to go. You're going to be fine. So this is a conversation that sometimes is better had on an individual basis and person to person. It's a conversation and something that I love teaching whenever patients ask or whenever they're curious about it, or even when they're not curious about it. And I think they should learn. So that's something that, again, if you're interested in, and we'll hop on this again later, but if you're interested, that's a conversation that Dr. Jeff and I love having with people. If you're a current patient, ask me about it. Ask one of us about it the next time you see us. If you're not a patient, call the office, get on the schedule. We'll do a consult. We'll have this conversation. We'll do some individualized things. That's kind of what we're about here. But we'll kind of hop on that again later. So that's number 5. Number 6, you can target where you burn fat or tone your muscles. No, you can't. Your body doesn't work like that. There isn't really a way to isolate where you're burning calories from. When your body is working, your body is working. Fat, adipose tissue, subcutaneous fat, body fat is simply just stored up energy that your body has stashed away for later use. And so when you're working out, regardless of what you're doing, your body doesn't go, oh, we're going to grab it from there only. Okay. We're not just going to keep picking energy from that one spot. It's wherever it comes from. Okay. So this whole do these, 4 exercises to burn fat, to burn specifically belly fat. That's not how it works. That's not how your body works. That's not how your physiology works. That ain't how your biochemistry works. It doesn't work. Your body's going to take it from wherever it can. Oftentimes it's first kind of around your organs if we have fat stored around our organs, which is not good, but your body doesn't take direction like that. It's not that specific. Your body just burns the fat that it has wherever it comes from first. So kind of the other piece of that where it's like, hey, we're going to tone these muscles. Toning is also not a thing. There is your muscle fibers either grow or they shrink. There is no other way to go. They don't multiply. They don't reduce in number. You have X number of muscle fibers and they're either going to grow or they're going to shrink. So the only way to tone musculature is to get that muscle bigger while also dropping body fat percentage, which again, you can't do in a single space. You can't do in a single spot, which is why you can't just have one really toned bicep and the other one's not, or one really toned bicep, but your triceps not really that toned. That ain't how it works. In order to tone musculature and look lean, you have to build muscle and get rid of body fat. You can do it separately. So people talk about bulking and then cutting. or bulking and then leaning out. People will talk about, body recomposition, which arguably is or is not a thing. The literature is a little bit mixed on it, but that's why it's important to, if that is your goal, that's why it's important to still eat enough, because you need protein in order to build muscle and in order to repair post-workout, but avoiding super high caloric intake, because otherwise your body's going to have a whole bunch of this extra energy that it's just going to store as fat again. So there's kind of a fine line to walk there. And again, it's different for everyone. That 2,000 calories a day benchmark is just like a very vague general guideline that they use because they had to pick something. So again, this is a conversation that if you are interested in, we can have a little more of an individual conversation. We can go through some of these things, tips, tricks, all that kind of stuff. None of them are easy. Some of them are simple. Very few of them are easy. It requires consistency. It requires effort. It requires focus. It requires, determination and consistency. So that's kind of where we're at that. You cannot target where you're burning fat. Regardless, I don't care what Instagram says, you can't. That's not how your physiology works. So that's number 6. Number 7, cardio is the best way to burn fat. No, it is not. People talk about, oh, my goal is I want to get lean. My goal is I don't like that. A lot of times is a goal for people. They're like, I want to get lean. I want to lose body fat. The best way to lose body fat is by increasing muscle mass. Muscle mass burns a lot more calories at rest than any other kind of tissue. So people will talk about like your basal metabolic rate. Okay. Your basal metabolic rate is how much energy your body needs to just like exist. Okay. That's where that 2,000 calorie a day mark comes from. That's a pretty average, we'll say, number of calories that someone would burn in a day, just like sitting on the couch watching TV. Okay. So in order to, the most efficient way to burn fat throughout the whole day is to have a lot more tissue that's just passively burning energy. Okay. Passively burning fat. Your muscles are the best tissue for that. So when you put on muscle mass, and again, you can put on muscle mass and lose fat at the same time. When you put on muscle mass, you are now A, looking more toned already, if that's your goal, and B, you are now also burning more fat just hanging out, just existing. People will talk about, zone 2 cardio is the best way because it's, you'll burn fat for the next half hour even after you're done. Yep, that's true. But would you rather burn that extra fat for a half hour, or would you rather burn it 24 hours a day? So that's where resistance training, weightlifting is going to be your best option in terms of if fat, like body fat percentage loss is your goal. Weight loss, body fat percentage loss, both of those are very much should be centered around building muscle mass. Because the more muscle mass you have, the higher your basal metabolic rate goes. So you're just sitting here, you're just hanging out, burning, 2,600 calories a day instead of 2,000 calories a day. So you're burning on average 600 more calories a day doing nothing different. Plus you'll also get the benefit of, okay, I'm lifting weights. My body's going to be using energy, going to be using fuel, going to be burning fat during that time. So you get that benefit. Plus now you're getting that all day long benefit. So that's not to say that cardio is bad. Cardio is very good. It's good for your cardiovascular health. But lifting weights is going to be building muscle mass is going to be a more efficient way of long-term burning fat. So plus, in addition to all those things, muscle mass is the number one, skeletal muscle mass is the number one marker of longevity. That's the research is pretty clear about the fact that the more muscle mass you have, the longer you will live. Obviously, without other extenuating circumstances, people who use steroids and those kinds of things tend to have shorter lives, but that's for other reasons. Naturally put on muscle mass as you age will keep you alive longer for some of those reasons that we talked about before. Falls are really big. It's a big concern for people. If you are strong, you are less likely to fall. and you probably have better balance. And B, if you do fall, you are more likely to be able to pick yourself up off the ground. As much as people hate burpees, burpees and squats are kind of the two most functional movements there are, because what's a burpee? A burpee is falling down and getting back up. So again, building muscle mass for those kinds of things is very, very, very important and very, very functional and very, very helpful throughout our entire life. So we'll kind of circle back around. Cardio is the best way to burn fat. No, it's not. It is good for you. It is good for your cardiovascular health. It's good for your heart health. It's good for your circulation, but not the best way to burn fat. Put on muscle mass. Your muscle mass will then passively burn it throughout the day. Okay. People always talk about like passive income. Muscle mass is passive income for your calories, for how much you for how much you can eat in a day and still be in a caloric deficit. Okay. So those are kind of our 7 big myths that tend to circulate around, again, whether it's on social media or, the gym bro that you talked to the other day at the gym. These 7 things are things that we should really change the narrative on, and things that we should adopt the opposite, right? Deadlifting is good for you when done correctly. Squatting below parallel is good for you when done properly. Lifting weights alone will not make you bulky. Okay. Lifting weights is very good for you. It's very functional. It makes you strong. It makes you able to live your life how you want to live your life. You don't necessarily need to be super sore after a workout. Your body's still doing all the things that it needs to do in order to get what it can from that workout. Ab workouts, okay, should look more like compound lifts, squatting, deadlifting, learning how to brace suitcase carries. Okay. Those are your best ways to have a strong functional core. Okay. The other piece of like getting a 6-pack is nutrition. That's kind of a different conversation, but you can't out train a crappy diet. Like you just can't. You can't do it. You won't give your body the things that it needs. You're going to naturally overconsume calories. It just ain't going to work. Number 6, you cannot target where you burn fat. You just can't. Toning's not a real thing. You have to build muscle mass and lose body fat. That's how you're going to look more toned. That's how you're going to look lean. Your body draws fat from wherever it can. It's not going to pick a specific spot, regardless of what exercise you're doing and regardless of whatever little trick or tool somebody's trying to sell you online. Number 7, cardio is not the best way to burn fat. Like I said, it is good for you. It is good for your heart. It's good for your cardiovascular health. It's not the best way to burn fat. The best way to do that is lifting weights, lift heavy, resistance training, build muscle mass. So kind of threw a lot at you, but like I said before, Dr. Jeff and I love having these conversations with people. If that's something that you're interested in, if that's kind of a step that you want to take, call the office, schedule a consult. We'd love to sit down. We'd love to help you out with wherever you're at in this, in this journey with any of these things, nutrition, exercise, functional movement, all that kind of stuff. Okay. So call the office, visit our website, www.myadvantagelife.com. Schedule a consult. We'd love to talk to you. And, we'd love to help you reach your goals, whatever they are, health, fitness, functional movement, nutrition, all those kinds of things. So that's all I got for you today. And thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time.